is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Nigeria kidnapping crisis persists as politician and a Swiss national are abducted. Killings in Africa's Sahel region worry the UN with 63 dead in just 2 days. And COVID cases around the globe surpass 203 million as the Delta variant drives new surge. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, experts warn of worsening inflation due to Nigeria's decision to ban Forex for money changers. And in sports, 100 meters Olympic champion, Italian Lamont Marcel Jacobs returns home to a hero's welcome. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. Let's begin in Guinea, where health authorities have confirmed one death from the Marburg virus. The virus is a highly infectious hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola. The patient, who has since died, first sought treatment in a local clinic before his condition worsened. Now, this is the first time that the deadly virus is being reported in West Africa. 12 major Marburg outbreaks have been reported in southern and eastern Africa since 1967. Guinea's case was identified last week, 2 months after the country was declared free of Ebola. It followed a brief Ebola flare-up that killed at least 12 people. Now, Nigerian authorities say a government official and a Swiss national have been kidnapped in separate incidents. Mohammed Sani Idris was abducted on Monday. Idris is Niger State's Commissioner for Information. The Swiss national was abducted along with his driver on Saturday. The Swiss national's identity is yet to be released. All right, joining us live now, we have a CGTN's correspondent Philly Haza and guest reporter Julia Leobova live from Geneva. Both of you, welcome to Africa Live. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with you, Phil. What more can you tell us about the abduction of the politician and Swiss national? What are the authorities saying about attempts to find both of them? Phil?
Well, thanks for having me. So far, we know that authorities in Nigeria have confirmed that attack. Of course, the Swiss government have also confirmed the incident. Not much details have been given about the data of the Swiss national or what operation the government or the local authorities are doing, but they say that they're in collaboration with local authorities here in Nigeria to find and rescue the Swiss national and his staff, who was a driver. Local authorities have also given a name as Andre Beta and his staff, who was a driver, as Ifai. We're also monitoring to see what the government is doing and also to know when these people will be released. But of course, we also know that the politician who is Nigeria's Niger State's Commissioner for Information was abducted on Monday. We also know that the government says authorities are on the trail of those kidnappers, but as to what kind of operation, whether a ransom will be paid and all of that, those informations have not been given. It's something that we've seen, happen for several months now, especially since December, when at least 1,000 people, especially students, have been kidnapped. And so, of course, the president has come out to say and condemn any acts of paying ransom from state governments because he says that will fuel even more of these kidnappings. For example, the Kaduna state government has insisted that they will not pay any ransom, and that's why we've seen some of the victims in that state not yet released. But then officials have been working, around the clock to see how that they can comb the forest, they can, provide some kind of intelligence, or rather produce some kind of intelligence to find these perpetrators of the attacks. But we're keeping tabs with the government, the local authorities in Niger State, that's Nigeria's north central state, and of course Ogun State, for the release of both the politician and the Swiss national.
All right, Phil, let's now bring Julia. Let's get Julia into this conversation. Julia, also, once again, welcome to Africa Live. Julia, the Swiss government says it is aware of the kidnapping of their national. What more do you have from there, Julia?
Well, at this stage, not all the details are known yet, but what we do know, of course, is that the Swiss national and his Nigerian driver were taken hostage on Saturday. They were coming from a farm on the Ibis Aitori Road in Ogun State. And according to reports, there was a gunfight between the police escort and the attackers. And reportedly, 2 of the attackers, they were killed by the police, but the Swiss national and his driver were abducted and taken away by the remaining attackers who formed a human shield. And well, on Monday, the Swiss Foreign Ministry has confirmed these reports of this abduction, but no details of the Swiss national's name or of any details of the ransom. If there is any request for that, none of this is known yet. But the local police are investigating the case, and the Swiss Foreign Ministry is in touch with the local authorities. So it is an ongoing situation. But also in 2015, the Swiss government passed a law requiring Swiss citizens abroad to register where they are, and the government insists it pays no ransom and it discourages nationals from venturing into high-risk areas.
All right. Julia, Phil, thank you so much. Thank you both for your insight and analysis. Now, let's turn our attention now to the Sahel, where officials say at least 63 people have been killed in attacks in the last 2 days. At least 12 soldiers were killed in an ambush by gunmen in the northwest of Burkina Faso on Sunday. 7 soldiers who had been reported missing have been found alive. On the same day, 51 civilians were killed in central Mali near the border with Niger. No group has claimed responsibility for the attacks. The Sahel region has been in the grip of an insurgency led by militants linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are the most affected. In Mali, French troops and UN peacekeepers have been battling the militants. Meanwhile, the UN mission in Mali has condemned the attacks on civilians.
Deliberate attacks against civilian populations constitute a serious violation of international human rights and international humanitarian law. Arrangements are underway for the deployment by the peacekeeping mission of a field mission to secure the scene, as well as the intensification of patrols in the affected areas and coordination with the Malian security and defense forces.
All right, let's turn our attention to Mozambique. A joint Rwandan-Mozambican force says they have regained control of a key port town. Rwanda sent a 1,000-strong force to the country in July. Astatal has more.
In less than a month, Rwandan troops have made key strategic advances against rebels in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado. Defense ministries from both countries say joint forces regained control of Mocimbo da Praia.
The enemy harbor was this Mocimbo da Praia. And as you have seen along the way, most of the enemy were killed along the way. So others have disappeared in a forest.
The port city was a key stronghold for rebels. Since 2017, an insurgency has shaken the Cabo Delgado province, displacing over 700,000 people.
We were living in harmony, but there were religious differences. We had people from other religions whose ideals we could not tolerate. They then decided to go into the forest to fight. We have been facing tragedies since the terrorists came here.
We do not know the cause of the conflict. We are suffering losses without knowing the cause of the conflict. We are just ordinary citizens.
The rebel group Al-Shabaab, no relation to the Somali terror organization, has been carrying out attacks in the region. While the group affiliates with ISIL, experts are still unclear about the role being played by the foreign terror group in Mozambique. Troops from Rwanda, in the meantime, have one clear objective: to root out the terror group from the country's north. Astatal, CGTN.
Some analysts have warned of regional insecurity as the Taliban push for new territory in Afghanistan. The United States has dispatched bombers and fighter jets to help government forces stave off recent advances. Mohammed Hardiz Pardez has more from Kabul.
The Taliban's rapid gains in recent days have spread a fog of uncertainty in Afghanistan. As warring parties point fingers, many civilians are counting losses. Some Afghan analysts say the Taliban's advancements have raised questions over the capability of government forces and the promise of Washington's support. Researcher Said Mansour Sadat says insecurity in Afghanistan would directly affect the stability of the region.
There will be a problem for surrounding nations, like especially Central Asian countries like China or Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan. So the terrorist groups will emerge. Nobody will know. There will be unknown supports for them.
Footage on social media platforms shows devastation from days of fighting. The United States has conducted airstrikes to push back the Taliban. An Afghan defense official tweeted that the group suffered casualties from a B-52 strike. Analyst Tariq Farhadi has been observing the situation in Afghanistan from abroad. He says bombing will not solve the misery.
Afghanistan's war has reached a catastrophic stage of epic nature by definition. There is a war between Taliban and the government in many cities of the country. Around the country, Lashkargah, Kandahar, Herat, Nimroz, Sheberghan, Kunduz. The Taliban attack, the government responds, but in the middle of this, the people who live in these cities are caught in sandwich. This has reached a humanitarian crisis level.
Farhadi says continued air support from the US is a short-term tactic. He says the international community must take a stand against the wave of violence that has intensified since US and other foreign troops pull out from Afghanistan. Mohammed Hadis Pardes, CGTN, Kabul.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. COVID cases around the globe surpassed 203 million as Delta variant drives new surge. And Egypt to introduce digital COVID vaccination passports to reduce crowding at certification centers.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Shiwishi, Tunis, Cairo,
Sharia,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. We appreciate your company. A reminder of one of our top stories at this hour in the Sahel. Officials say at least 63 people have been killed in attacks in the last 2 days. At least 12 soldiers were killed in an ambush by gunmen in the northwest of Burkina Faso on Sunday. Now, 7 soldiers who had been reported missing have been found alive. On the same day, 51 civilians were killed in central Mali near the border with Niger. No group has claimed responsibility for the attacks. The Sahel region has been in the grip of an insurgency led by militants linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are the most affected. In Mali, French troops and UN peacekeepers have been battling militants. Meanwhile, the UN mission in Mali has condemned the attacks on civilians. Well, to understand what's happening in the Sahel, let's bring in Ornella Marderon, head of the Sahel program at the Institute for Security Studies. She is joining us live via Zoom from Bamako in Mali. Well, welcome to the program. Thank you for taking time to speak to us. Well, what is the driving rise in killings in the Sahel at this time?
as you rightly mentioned, the Sahel has been confronted with a dire security crisis for the past at least 9 years. Over the past few months, we have seen a revival of violence against civilians with a series of mass attacks on villages, including in Niger, in Burkina Faso, and most recently in Mali, in the northern part of Mali. This is in a context where non-state armed groups, especially violent extremist groups, have been extremely active and pushing for an agenda that really pushes them to want and control entire communities.
Well, Ornella, as you have mentioned, we are seeing a trend where killings occur, but no one is claiming responsibility. What does this say about the perpetrators and their methods?
It depends, really. I mean, over the course of the crisis that has been lasting for years now, some attacks have been claimed and some haven't. In the most recent months, we rather see a trend, as you rightly mentioned, towards the lack of responsibility claiming. That being said, it's pretty clear from the modes of action who could be behind these attacks, and the main suspects, I would say, are two main coalitions of Islamist groups. On the one hand, the group for the support of Islam and the Muslim, the JSIM, or Jinim in English, and on the other side, the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. There are various reasons why these groups could be either slower or not willing to publicly claim these attacks, and one of them, I think, is the fact that there is a form of opposition going on between the two groups themselves.
Well, Ornella, with that being said, how are governments there and regional forces like the G5 Sahel responding to this new wave?
This is a great question. I mean, governments have been trying, governments and more generally conventional forces, I would say. So this includes national defense and security forces, as well as G5 Sahel Joint Force, as well as other international partners, the French force in Mali, and so on. So all of these forces have been trying to curb the Islamic attack for months now, and this hasn't been extremely successful. There hasn't been any clear change in strategy in the recent months, if not for the French announcing a withdrawal at least a partial withdrawal from northern Mali. So one of the main concerns among the public opinion here in Mali, I think, is, well, how exactly can the government, in the midst of a transition period that's already politically challenging in itself, adjust and increase its capacity to provide protection for civilians? There's no clear answer, and I think that's part of the concerning part in this.
All right, let's leave the conversation there for now. Ornella Marderon, the head of Sahel program at the Institute of Security Studies, thank you, many thanks. We appreciate your perspective. And in other significant news, global cases for COVID-19 infections have reached more than 203 million, with over 4.3 million deaths. Now, many countries are struggling with surges caused by the Delta variant. In China, for instance, the mainland has reported 143 new cases, 108 of them local infections. Most are in two provinces. Jiangsu has 50 and Henan has 37. Hubei saw 15 cases and Hunan 6. The mainland now has over 1,700 active cases. 5 villages in Henan's Zhangyang County have been designated high-risk areas. The provincial capital, Zhangzhou, has started testing for targeted groups, those having close contact with COVID-19 patients, airports, and port staff and medical staff at some hospitals. Now, all areas in the northern city of Shenyang have been eased to low risk. Ticket sales for trains and flights from Shenyang to Beijing have resumed. Anti-vaccine protesters have tried to storm the former BBC headquarters in London after the government announced a new COVID policy. Clashes erupted with police on Monday in a protest against vaccine passports and inoculation for children. Police tried to hold back the crowd. Local media quoted police as saying no arrests were made. And in the U.S., most COVID-19 patients in hospitals have not been vaccinated. The recent surge of infections has spawned a new wave of mask mandates across the country, angering many Americans. Karina Huber reports.
9 months after COVID-19 vaccines became available in the United States, roughly 68% of eligible Americans have received at least one dose. That still leaves millions of unvaccinated Americans, largely by choice.
Millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk. This is an even bigger concern because of the Delta variant.
The Delta variant is now dominant in the U.S. In many parts of the country, cases have soared, as have hospitalizations. Deaths are also on the rise, overwhelmingly among the unvaccinated. Political leaders have implored and even paid people to get a shot. Bioethicist Art Kaplan says the U.S. has been too soft on the unvaccinated.
They've been screaming and yelling about their rights in the U.S. for a long time now, and I think we bent over backwards to accommodate what I consider irresponsible behavior.
In response to the latest surge, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is now advising people, even the vaccinated, to wear masks indoors in many parts of the U.S. Some, including the Republican governor of Alabama, is fed up.
But it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
Polls indicate a majority of vaccinated Americans agree. A recent poll found 4 out of 5 vaccinated Americans blame the recent surge on the unvaccinated. Vaccine mandates are on the rise, but some are saying there should be penalties for those who refuse to get a jab. The National Football League recently notified teams that if there are any outbreaks among unvaccinated players that lead to games being canceled, the players could be held responsible for the loss of games and paychecks. Kaplan believes the unvaccinated should also be held liable for putting other people at risk.
If you harm me, you make my child sick, you put my grandmom in the hospital, you kill my baby, I should be suing you and holding you responsible and liable. And I do think choices have consequences.
In a positive sign, vaccination uptake has increased substantially in many states over the past week. As the Delta variant has shown, it has no intention of slowing down. Karina Huber, CGTN.
The Egyptian Health Ministry says it'll soon be launching a digital health passport. It's a mobile app that indicates the COVID-19 vaccination status of citizens. The tech solution aims to reduce crowding at vaccine certification centers where scores rush to get paper travel permits proving they are vaccinated. Now here is Adel El-Mafroui with more on that.
For months, Egyptians who wanted to travel abroad had to shuttle between vaccination centers, health and foreign ministry offices to be issued an internationally recognized COVID-19 vaccine certificate. This month, the government introduced an English replacement to the Arabic version of the COVID-19 vaccination certificate the government has been issuing.
Since we began this service on August 1st, there has been a huge influx of citizens. They need to go through a lot of procedures in order to get document authentications for travel. The paper has a QR code, watermark, and UV ink to prevent forging.
Egyptian travelers showed up daily at one of 126 offices nationwide that offered the new certificate. Due to the huge demand, the government feared these centers could become a source of further viral infections. It's why the Health Ministry announced a new solution this week, a mobile app that will act as a digital health passport.
QR codes for vaccine status is now a global demand. It's like a passport which I need to leave airports and enter others to satisfy authorities that I am COVID safe. The app helps in having this certification on your phone. The app will be much better because it will help me avoid contact with people.
It's a great idea. It will make people's lives easier. Everyone has a phone, so no one will need to stand in lines here or move from one building to the other to get your travel documents ready.
The app adopts a traffic light alert system. It'll show green for fully vaccinated, yellow for receiving a single dose, and red for not vaccinated. Egypt's new health digital passport will record the brand of the vaccine and the dates on which the jab was administered. Health officials say the new mobile application will be used to access public places like theaters and sports events. The new technology also introduces what it calls promote mode, an option to identify all those vaccinated around you in the same location. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Relentless rain in South Sudan is once again causing flooding in parts of the country, washing away crops, livestock, and displacing people. The United Nations is warning that flooding is likely to worsen the food security situation. This is in a country where the UN says 3/4 of the people are struggling to get one meal a day. CGTN's Patrick Ayet reports.
It is now rainy season in South Sudan. Parts of the country's northern and eastern regions are flooding again. The rains have submerged homes and destroyed farms, leaving families homeless and hungry. The UN says up to 90,000 people have been affected by flash floods in Jonglei in the eastern part of South Sudan. For many, this is the second time they have faced flooding since May, intensifying an acute food shortage.
Here in Greater Bejbor, we have a lot of flood sometime coming. And second is insecurity. Insecurity, sometimes like what I say, let me focus in the unity. So sometimes there is a differences among community.
South Sudan's government says the flooding is making it harder for people to cope and survive. It is calling on aid agencies to assist. Aid agencies say the cost of providing humanitarian services is now higher than ever before as roads are being washed away due to the flooding. The United Nations says the flooding in the country is a distressing example of how a changing climate is disrupting the normal patterns of life for South Sudanese people. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says his government still has a long way to go to empower South Africa's women. He was speaking during a National Women's Day virtual address. Ramaphosa said the violence against women in his country threatens the very foundations of its democracy. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
This year's National Women's Day here in South Africa has been declared a year of Charlotte Maxeke. Maxeke, a women's rights activist, was the first black woman to graduate with a university degree. She was also one of the founders of the Bantu Women's League, which later became the African National Congress Women's League.
A courageous women's rights activist and also a leader who was born 150 years ago. We celebrate this year of her birth because we want to encourage the women of our country to follow in her example and her footsteps.
The country is also commemorating women who fought apartheid against pass laws. The pass laws required that black South Africans over the age of 16 carry a passbook known as the Dompas everywhere and at all times to identify themselves. On this day, 65 years ago, 20,000 South African women marched to the union buildings in Pretoria demanding an end to that law.
Just as the women of 1956 who fought against the injustices of their time, the women of today are engaged in a new struggle. It is a struggle for equal rights, dignity, economic liberation, and freedom from violence.
The president could not avoid addressing the issue of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence continues to increase here in South Africa. It's a distressing issue for government and society at large. Violence against women and children has increased substantially since the government imposed lockdowns to fight the spread of the coronavirus in early 2020. President Ramaphosa says his government is determined to continue to fight this scourge.
Key legislation around domestic violence, bail and the sentencing of offenders, as well as the broadening of the scope of sexual offences and other matters is currently before Parliament. Our courts are handing down harsh penalties and sentences to those found guilty of gender-based violence, and conviction rates in sexual offences cases have improved.
The president called on South Africans to join what he calls one of the most important struggles to ensure a society where women feel safe and are safe. Yudi Sanjamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Don't go away. We've got your business segment coming up in just a moment. Here's a peek at the headlines. Coming up in business, experts warn of worsening inflation due to Nigeria's decision to ban Forex for money changers. And Russia resumes flights to Egyptian resorts for the first time since October 2015.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. I'm Richard Nta. Finance experts say a decision to ban Forex sale to money changers may have a negative impact on the inflation rate as the festive season approaches. With an increase in the buying and selling of goods from abroad, many are concerned about whether enough Forex will be available. Experts say more documentation demanded by banks before releasing Forex to customers may in turn send them back to the money changers in the black market. Another concern is that even if Eurobonds bring in more Forex exchange supply, the cost may be too high due to Nigeria's current debt profile. South Africa is currently one of the world's largest carbon emitters, and with a lot of other countries now moving away from fossil fuel-based electricity, there's considerable pressure for South Africa to follow. As CGTN's Angela Coppola now explores, the country's national power utility has put forward a $10 billion plan to global lenders that would see it shut the vast majority of its coal-fired plants by 2050 and embrace renewable energy.
Part of the government plan for the future energy mix includes 4 gigawatts of power to come from gas-fired power stations.
At the end of the day, gas is also a fossil fuel. It is also carbon intensive, and we can't have a system whereby we are getting all of our electricity needs generated by fossil fuels. Gas is cleaner than coal. This is true. It's got less emissions intensity, but there are a number of factors that come into this.
There is a market for gas in the country currently. Some 200 petajoules of gas is used by industrial consumers annually, and it will increase as the country moves to meet its climate change targets.
We estimate that the gas demand will probably come out at about 2.5 times what we're currently using. So roughly speaking, between 500 and 600 petajoules per annum.
As demand for gas increases by industrial users and eventually Eskom, there's a concern about the need for more gas receiving infrastructure.
Eskom has a similar position than us. There is no capacity, in fact, to service Eskom's needs right now for 3 to 4 gigawatts of power in the immediate future. That is all new capacity that will have to be brought on stream in order to meet that demand.
A recent development sees financial institutions looking to invest in countries who are serious about reducing their impact on climate change. It's all about the cost of decarbonizing.
For South Africa, for example, it's $7 per ton, compared to the EU, which is $120 per ton. So in other words, all these financiers are looking at countries like this and thinking these countries are basically low-hanging fruit. And if we can give the financing at this point in time, a lot can happen.
Eskom has made its intentions clear. It's planning a just transition from coal to gas, renewables and nuclear.
And that is also based on some of these funding mechanisms that they're looking at as well. And for them, it makes sense because if they can get this sort of financing, they can also move to a more renewables heavy system.
Not everyone's excited about the transition from coal to gas, but it's seen as a bridging energy source and needed to reduce the carbon emissions. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt is experiencing a surge in electronic commerce and online trade, and authorities are excited about it. The central bank has allocated about $100 million to fintech startups to support growth of the sector. Specifically, authorities are looking at startups offering non-banking payment solutions required to support e-commerce. CGTN's Yasser Hakim takes up the story of one company that's been successfully providing such services.
Tagir, or trader in Arabic, is a fast-growing e-commerce startup that has seen an impressive average growth of 40% per month since established in 2019. The social e-commerce platform is enabling online merchants with end-to-end logistics in the market.
We have like hundreds of thousands of online small sellers, but all of them go to the service providers on their own, which makes it like super expensive. So what we do is we build a one-stop shop online platform where we can aggregate all of these thousands of merchants and then go and deal with the suppliers as one unit. And this way you will get much more lower prices, which will come with the benefit of the entire network. We found that those are an informal economy. The e-commerce social sellers online, they're so deprived, they don't have anyone supporting them.
One of the biggest challenges for small online merchants is lack of access to banking services, payments, and credit lines.
Definitely payment is not the easiest things. I mean, the number of wallets there is limited. It's not a wide range of wallets. Like services are not stable all the time. That's because of the massive pressure there is on only 3 or 4 wallets. Most of our merchants, they are maybe students, they may be like housewives, they may be like online sellers. They're not necessarily have this steady flow of income would justify they open a bank account. So basically payment is picking up in Egypt, but definitely we have a long way to go there.
There's a growing number of fintechs in the market that aim at filling this gap. Tagir claims to use AI and data science to enable first-time sellers to start and scale their online business with relatively low risk.
The existence of Tagir made these guys not need financing at all, because Tagir goes and deals with suppliers on their behalf. We are partnering up with number of fintech partners so that they can provide services to our merchants, like they can provide early profit payments to them, they can provide them with loans, they can provide them with all of. So Tagir's vision is all about partnering with other fintech partners to provide these services to the merchants. The rise of fintech generally will help include lots of these merchants into the fintech ecosystem.
Tagir has recently closed $6.4 million in its latest seed round. The startup plans to expand and provide similar financial and technical solutions to e-commerce in the Middle East and North African region. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Flights bringing tourists from Russia to Egypt's Red Sea resorts have landed for the first time since October 2015. The flight ban was imposed after an insurgent group, Islamic State, bombed a Russian passenger plane shortly after it took off from the popular resort Sharm el-Sheikh, killing all 224 people on board. Monday morning's Egypt Air flight from the Russian capital brought 300 tourists to the resort town of Hurghada. A second flight later landed in Sharm el-Sheikh, where Russia's ambassador to Egypt and the provincial governor welcomed the passengers. Egypt Air says the national carrier will be operating a total of 7 flights a week between Moscow, Hurghada, and Sharm el-Sheikh. U.S. lawmakers are trying to complete legislation that puts green energy at the heart of of a $1 trillion infrastructure upgrade. Senators reached a consensus just as the United States issued a stark warning about how fast climate change is accelerating. But there is also concern that the cost will cripple a heavily indebted federal government. Owen Fairclough has more.
If U.S. President Joe Biden is in a hurry.
Do you see that sucker over there? 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds. It's all electric.
Then the United Nations warning that climate change is happening faster than the world thought is a call to accelerate efforts to find cleaner, greener transport.
I'm signing an executive order setting out a target of 50% of all passenger vehicles sold by 2030 will be electric.
Senators spent the weekend moving closer to that goal, agreeing a $1 trillion infrastructure upgrade that aims to protect the environment.
The largest investment in clean energy transmission in history. The largest investment in climate resiliency in history. And the largest investment in transportation electrification in history.
And with climate change yet another touchstone for political polarization, this deal was a rare victory for bipartisanship.
We will demonstrate that both Republicans and Democrats can come together and do big things.
But a bill that took months to negotiate must now be signed off by the lower House of Representatives. And Democrats say they'll do so only once they've agreed another bill that includes spending to mitigate climate change. And that's more than 3 times as expensive as the infrastructure deal. If the UN is issuing a new wake-up call about the accelerating impact of climate change, well, the Congressional Budget Office here in the United States is concerned about all this new government spending. It says the cost of the infrastructure bill alone will swell the federal budget deficit by some $256 billion. And now the Treasury Department says that unless the US addresses its borrowing limits urgently, the federal government is in danger of running out of money to function in just a few months' time. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
More than 30 leading trade groups have urged the Biden administration to resume negotiations with China and remove tariffs, which they say are harming the U.S. economy. The trade groups have urged the U.S. government to restart talks with China and ensure Beijing meets its commitments under the 2020 Phase 1 trade deal and increase purchases of American goods during the rest of this year. The move comes as U.S. industries face increased costs to manufacture products and provide services domestically, making their exports and these products and services less competitive abroad. That's after the U.S. maintained tariffs on Chinese imports to put pressure on Beijing to fulfill its obligation under the trade pact. Well, time now for a short break. Don't go away. We're just getting started. Here's what's ahead. Egypt completes the transfer of King Khufu's solar boat from the pyramids of Giza to the Grand Egyptian Museum.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. After 48 hours navigating the streets of Giza, an ancient Egyptian vessel has arrived at its new home. King Khufu's boat was transported near the pyramids of Giza to the Grand Egyptian Museum. But as Yasser Hakim reports, moving it was no easy feat. Let's take a look.
Known as the solar boat, it was built by King Khufu or Cheops more than 4,600 years ago to take the king and his belongings to the afterworld after his death. Discovered intact next to the pyramids of Cheops in 1954, officials here describe it as the oldest and largest organic wooden artifact in the history of mankind. They said for it to be well preserved, the vessel had to be moved from its outdated display hall.
Since almost 40 years, this ugly building is not really fit for a boat like this. This one, it looks for me not a museum. It looks like a hangar for me. It's like a store magazine for the boat, not for the people to visit. So that's why we decided, while we are building now the Grand Egyptian Museum, that we decided to add one more section to be like a museum for the boat of the King Cheops.
42 meters long and weighing 20 tons, it was a huge challenge to transport the boat in one piece. It was placed inside a metal cage and lifted on a remote-controlled truck brought specially for this purpose from Belgium.
We have to move around and taking really a good care, because the road from the pyramid area to the Grand Egyptian Museum is not really an even road or a straight one. We have to move right and left, up and down. At the same time, we have to keep the boat horizontal like this. This is one of the main reasons that we spent almost 2 years for making our study to bring this kind of car from Belgium, what we call it smart car, to make sure that during the transportation, we have to keep the boat horizontal in stable position.
It took 48 hours to move the vessel only 8 kilometers at a maximum speed of just 600 meters per hour. It is finally resting at its new home, the Grand Egyptian Museum, to be put on display at the end of the year. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
In South Africa, a Chinese language competition was held in Cape Town. The winners will have the opportunity to study in China for free. Now, this includes tuition as well as food, lodging, and round-trip air tickets. Let's take a closer look.
With COVID-19 restrictions, many South African teenagers feel robbed of their normal school life. Classes are rotational, with half the school attending 1 week and the other half attending the next.
I miss school so much because I have nothing to do at home.
I definitely want to come back to school. I miss learning every day. I feel like I'm missing a lot of information, and they've also cut the curriculum, so I feel like there's a lot less information that I'm getting that I would have been getting if there was no pandemic.
So when this year's Chinese language contest was announced, many teenagers turned up. For them, this is an opportunity to prove their skills in Mandarin as they sample the rich Chinese culture.
What's your favorite Chinese city?
After a bruising battle, Lisa Diman emerged top, and she has an inspiration.
I really love the Chinese food, and I love the people and the environment, and I would like to learn more about their culture.
The competition in its 14th year has been taking place since 2008.
For the Mandarin culture and for the competition, it's there just to support, to guide, to give them the opportunity to expose our learners. Our grade 8s and 9s do it full time, and then our grade 10s, 11s and 12s, obviously they choose it as a choice of subject. And so for us as a school, it's just to ensure that we bridge the gap in culture and in education.
For Lisa and the second place winner, they will travel to China to represent South Africa in the finals. The third and fourth place winners will accompany them to watch the competition. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Don't go away, we have a lot more coming your way.